This message comes from Indiana University. Indiana University is committed to moving the world forward, working to tackle some of society's biggest challenges. 9 campuses, 1 purpose, creating tomorrow today. More at iu.edu.
In Israel last week, Eli Elbag wanted to do something about his daughter, Liri, who'd been captured by Hamas a year ago when she was 18 and is still hostage somewhere in Gaza. And so he took a bullhorn and went to stand outside an event that was being held by the prime minister's political party, Likud. Basically, he wanted the people running the country to make some kind of deal with Hamas and bring his daughter home. And so, he's standing there with his bullhorn, this grieving, worried parent who doesn't know if he's ever going to see his child again. And someone throws an egg at him. And another egg. Somebody yells and calls him a cancer on Israel. Somebody else accuses him of being funded by Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas. This is not unusual in Israel. The country is bitterly divided between people like these hostage families who are saying, stop the fighting, make a deal with Hamas, bring home the hostages. And on the other side, the prime minister's supporters and his coalition, the people running the government, who want to press on with the war and get to a more complete victory over Hamas. I have an Israeli friend who said to me that this war is different from ones in the past in Israel, because in the past, he said, once the war started, everybody united. This time, it's driven people further apart, to the point where even these anguished families, who you think would have universal sympathy in a country at war, are the target of all kinds of hate. Some other examples, a real estate mogul, who's also a big Likud supporter, writes tweets that call for the death of the mother of one of the hostages. Or here's a video that was posted online of an Israeli right-winger on a motorcycle who pulls over next to a group of hostage families and tells them, "You're going to be murdered. I'm going to murder you. Mark my words." So in Israel, supporting the hostages for so many people has come to mean that you oppose the Israeli government and the way that they're conducting the war, and you want a ceasefire and a deal with Hamas. I think here in the United States, we have a different picture of the hostages and what they stand for. Here, I think there's this feeling that if you support the hostages, you support the war and the current Israeli government and the way it's conducted that war, with all the bombings and death. The hostages are a symbol, but a symbol that means different things to different people in the U.S. and Israel. It's been a year since the hostages were taken. The current conflict with Hamas began last October 7th with the killing of 1,200 people and the kidnapping of 251 others. So much has happened since then, of course. Israel killed over 40,000 Palestinians. 90% of the population, almost 2 million Palestinians, have been displaced from their homes. This past week, Israel expanded the war to Lebanon with a ground invasion. Iran sent missiles in response, and the White House has been scrambling to try to stop a full-out regional war. At this point, this war is about so many other things than the hostages. But those 251 people, 117 of them released or rescued, 70 dead, and 64 who are presumed alive and in captivity, are still this symbol. They're on posters that people put up and other people tear down. They're on Bring Them Home bracelets. But they're also, people, each having their own personal and specific experience of this war. An experience that politics flattens and wipes away. Just 2 weeks after the Hamas attack, very early on, an 85-year-old hostage named Yocheved Lifshitz was released and sent home. The Israelis were pretty excited. They did a press conference from the hospital. She was put on live TV in a wheelchair. Her daughter helped her hear the questions and give answers. Somebody asked, "When Hamas released you, why did you shake the Hamas guy's hand?" Her reply?
Because they treated us very nicely. My mom is saying that they were very delicate and gentle with them and took care of all their needs.
Television commentators and newspaper columnists jumped in, calling this press conference a disaster, a propaganda win for Hamas, an embarrassment for the hospital. Mind you, Lifshitz also said a lot of awful things about Hamas and her abduction. Attackers running rampant, beating people young and old. They hit her in the ribs with a wooden pole. But the story that came out of the press conference was that she said something nice about Hamas. Within a month, the hospital spokesman who organized that press conference was out of the job. There's certain things that Israelis just did not want to hear right then. Here at our program, throughout this year, we've tried to document what this war has been for Palestinians and also for Israelis. And this week, a year after those people became hostages, we thought it might be a good time to hear about their actual lived experiences. All the complicated parts that don't fit neatly into some symbolic picture of them. There are these long interviews that an Israeli journalist, Lee Naim, has been doing with hostages who've been released on a daily news podcast called Echad B'Yom, One a Day. In these interviews, you get to hear them just talking at length. They're not a soundbite, not an image on a poster. You hear what really happened, the complexity of what they went through and what they saw and felt. One of the things that's especially interesting, I think, to hear is the hostages' stories about their interactions with the people holding them captive, who, I have to say, they come across with way more dimension than I might have guessed. So, most of this hour we're going to be hearing from one of the Echad B'Yom interviewees, a woman named Chen Almog Goldstein. And then when we get to the second half of the show, we're going to hear from a few of the other hostages who were interviewed. I hope you stick around. From WBEZ Chicago, it's This American Life. I'm Eric Glass. Stay with us.
This message comes from Wise, the app for doing things in other currencies. Send, spend, or receive money internationally and always get the real-time mid-market exchange rate with no hidden fees. Download the Wise app today or visit wise.com. T's and C's apply.
It's This American Life. Part 1, the abduction. Just a heads up if you're listening with kids, some of this gets intense. So, Chen Almog Goldstein lived in a kibbutz called Kfar Aza, about 2 miles from the Gaza border, with her husband Nadav and their 4 children. She and Nadav met in junior high school. She worked as a social worker for a while, but then focused on raising her kids. The morning of October 7th, sirens went off, and they went to the safe room in their house. One of the things a lot of people talk about in these interviews is how mystified they were that the army did not show up. For many Israelis, that is the second astonishing thing that happened that morning, that the military forces Israelis trust to keep them safe didn't arrive for over 8 hours, for reasons that still haven't been formally investigated. Chen's family stayed in the safe room for 5 hours. Then, men entered the house, reached where they were, shot her husband Nadav in the chest, she says, right in front of them. Soon after that, they shot her oldest daughter, Yam, in the face. Yam was 20 and home on leave from her mandatory military service. Chen says the last time she saw Yam, she was flailing on the floor. Then Chen and her 3 other children were led outside. There was her 17-year-old daughter, Agam, and also her 2 sons, who were younger, 11 and 9.
הם הובילו אותנו קודם לרכב של נדב, ואז לרכב שלי.
They led us to Nadav's car, first to Nadav's car and then to my car. They tried to start Nadav's car, but his car, when it's starting, it's very quiet. If you don't know the car, you probably wouldn't understand. So they probably thought it's not working, and they brought the keys to my car, and we got into my car.
שאני מצד אחד מסתכלת כאילו לשיחים, משוועת שמישהו כאילו...
And I'm looking to the bushes still, hoping that maybe someone will signal to me with their finger. Maybe I tell the kids to escape, but on the other hand, it was dangerous. I remember realizing this is very crucial what I decide right now. I was afraid. They had us now.
אני זוכרת את המבטים של הילדים בדרך לעזה, מבטים...
I remember the kids' faces on the way to Gaza, very deep, terrified looks at me. I remember they asked me what happened to my lips, the boys. My lips were probably white. I was shocked. I was completely shocked.
And
I'm in the car with the kids on the way to Gaza, and I need to understand and figure out that it was really important for me to tell the kids first that Yam is not with us anymore, and Nadav probably isn't as well.
המחבלים אומרים משהו? Do the terrorists say anything?
הם שמחים.
They're happy. They're very happy. I remember the driver and the guy next to him. They're filming us. I remember we're putting our heads down, Agam and me. Then they stopped near the fence. It was their fence already because it was after some drive through the field. And they piled dead bodies on my car. I remember Agam telling the boys to look away.
ו7 דקות, אנחנו בעזה.
And after 7 minutes, we're in Gaza. It's unbearable how easy it was and how fast. I mean, first of all, we were in shock. I was in shock.
Chen said this a couple of times in her interview. The part of what was so stunning about being taken hostage was how quick it was. 1 minute she was in her home. Minutes later, she was in Gaza, in captivity.
אני זוכרת אזור כאילו נטוש כזה,
I remember like a deserted area. There are papers flying in the air.
ועוצרים את האוטו שלי, מעבירים אותנו לרכב אחר, נוסעים עוד איזושהי דרך.
And then they stop my car. They put us in another car. We drive for a little more, and then a gate opens. The car goes in, and the gate closes.
They're at a private home. That's where the car stops. Chen says that her kids, till then, had held it together.
That entire time, the kids were just so level-headed. Their conduct was it was amazing. Like, they didn't cry, they didn't do anything dangerous, they didn't yell, they didn't try to hold on to my clothes. I think they even tried to talk to the terrorists, like talk to them in English.
But now, next to this private home, they see the entrance to a tunnel.
זה הפעם הראשונה שטל אז בן 9 כמעט, בוכה.
And this is the first time that Tal was 9 at the time. This is the first time he's crying. He saw this black hole and he got scared. Tal cried a bit when he stared at this tunnel, but he calmed down. They brought him water. And that's it. We're going down this tunnel. It's not very deep. And we meet other hostages from Kfar Aza. An elderly couple, a young guy, and each is telling their own kidnapping story, and we can't believe we're in Gaza.
תוכל לתאר לי את התנאים במנהרה הזו? Can you describe the condition in the tunnel?
חול בכל מקום.
Sand. There was sand everywhere and also in our mouth. There was a hallway that leads to this small room with some mattresses. There's constant sweeping because there's constant sand. And it's pretty hot there. 27 degrees.
27 degrees, that's 80 degrees Fahrenheit.
27 degrees and very humid, very damp.
Chen and her kids, plus the 3 other hostages from the kibbutz, were kept in the tunnel for 2 nights, she says. At one point, one of the guards brings a deck of cards to keep the kids occupied. The boys, remember, were 9 and 11. Agam's the oldest, 17.
אגם חטפה שם איזשהו התקף של קוצר נשימה, חרדה.
And Agam got some sort of a panic attack. She started hyperventilating. She couldn't breathe. And so they attempted to calm her down. They said, you'll be back in Israel by Tuesday. Tuesday, you're back. And this was said on Monday. We were kidnapped on Saturday. And the truth is, I thought so too. I thought we'll be back by Tuesday.
קרה פה מה שלא קרה אף פעם, אנחנו בעזה עם ילדים.
We're in Gaza with children. Israel is not going to attack. Israel is not going to do what it always does. First, they're going to free us, and then they're going to figure out what they're going to do.
On Tuesday, they do leave the tunnel. Not for Israel. They're taken to a house next to the tunnel.
ובית שמתעורר.
And it's a house that is full of the sounds of kids, babies, women. And there we can already hear the attacks. Gaza is being bombarded at this point. And then they start prepping us for another move.
Any move through the streets, where they would be surrounded by Gazans, just random civilians, was always a production. Because their captors were hiding them from the Israelis, from the general public, from everybody. They didn't want people to know that there were Israeli hostages walking right beside them on the street. So they put Agam and Chen into full-length jalabiyas and hijabs. 2 boys, Gal and Tal, got hats. Then they moved them outside. It's 5 days into the war. Israel's bombarding Gaza. Chen and her kids see Israeli jets flying overhead. Chen says she and Agam take all this in and say Fauda to each other. Fauda's a big Israeli TV series, an action show about military special ops in the West Bank and Gaza. They end up in an apartment where they spend the next 5 weeks, most of their time in Gaza. Part 2. Daily life in captivity. So different hostages say they were held by different militant groups in all sorts of locations and all sorts of conditions. Some hostages who've been released said they were beaten or sexually assaulted. Chen's family was now in a residential apartment building, guarded by 2 men who very much wanted to keep them a secret from all the civilians living around them on all sides, which had lots of consequences for the way they lived. Chen remembers it being really hot in that apartment. They had an electric fan, but electricity was only on for an hour or 2 a day.
So it's very hard without the fan when the windows are pretty much closed. There are heavy curtains on the windows, and we weren't allowed to go near them. We weren't allowed. They keep opening them, closing them, open, close. They don't want anyone to hear us, even people just in the building or, of course, people on the streets. I remember it was very hard for me to fall asleep there. I was always the last one, always tossing and turning because you're sweating there the whole time. Everything is wet. You're just soaked in sweat.
והפגזות בלילה, בשלב הזה, בדירה הזאת, הם עוד כל הזמן היו מסבירים לנו.
And there are bombings at night, and at that stage, in this apartment where we were, they were still like explaining to us, like, this is bombings from the sky, this is from the sea, this is artillery. And when the house shook, they would move with us, sway with us. We were on, I don't know which floor, maybe fifth. At that stage, at least they would say, baida, like it's far. Like you hear the whistle, you know the fall is going to be far. They were trying to tell us it's going to be okay. It's far. They tried to calm us down. They wanted us to be okay.
Living among the Palestinians, the Israeli hostages suffered through some of the same hardships of the war. Many hostages in their interviews talk about how hungry they were. The captors tried to give them 2 meals a day. As the Israeli bombing campaign progressed, of course, and the army rolled in, food and water got harder and harder to get in Gaza, to the point where now Gaza is on the edge of famine, according to the United Nations.
Water, they try to provide, drinking water. You can't drink water from the tap. First of all, there isn't like a steady flow of water. Sometimes there's just a drip, and it's basically salt water. Bathroom, very difficult bathrooms. You can't just like flush the water. Maybe we had it in the first 2 days, but then we couldn't flush the water. There was a really bad smell in the bathrooms.
When power would come on for an hour sometimes, she says, they'd get running water. And then they had to decide who could shower. Guards, or some of them. Agam, the teenager, really wanted to wash her hair. With all that competition, Chen says, she pretty much gave up on showers for herself.
אני הרגשתי הרגשה מאוד מוזרה פיזית שם, כל השהות בעזה.
I felt very strange in Gaza physically, the whole stay in Gaza. I was very weak, and I kept thinking about what happened at home. I forced myself to remember how I last saw Yam after she was shot. Like, it was like a form of torture, of self-punishment. Fortunately, over time, as time passes, that image gets blurry, and I remember Yam as beautiful and happy, but I remember at first I was really forcing myself to not forget how I saw her. I mean, the whole thing just took seconds, and I ran outside. I ran outside to the kids. I didn't go down to help her. I didn't check on her. I was terrified.
אני פשוט הייתי מבוהלת. כשאני מנתחת את זה היום, אני אומרת, בחרתי כאילו בחיים, מצאתי החוצה לאגם ולגל ולטל.
Looking back now, I realized that in a way I chose life. Like I went outside to Agam and Gal and Tal.
Now, in this apartment, with those 3 surviving kids, Juan says she was in a constant state of alert to protect them. She says she cried every day. But the captors did not like seeing them cry. She says they wanted them happy, not sad. So she tried to conceal all that. One night, she says, the apartment started shaking from a bomb that fell nearby, and the guards had them evacuate. They all go into the street.
There's total darkness. It's 7 p.m. and Gaza is destroyed, is devastated, and we're walking outside. We didn't walk long, but we were outside, me and the kids, and all of a sudden there's fire on us. I see the red lasers and the balls of fire and shooting on us, fire.
From airplanes?
That's how it looked like. It came from above, from the air. And they discuss with us many times the absurdity of the fact that they are protecting us from our own military. We had many conversations with them about it, about how absurd it is. And they would really put it in our faces and kind of laugh about it and smile about it. And would be like, do you understand what is going on here? We are watching you. We are protecting you. There was one night, we spent the night in a supermarket, and it was the first time there was an attack right near us on the street, and the supermarket, the whole place shook, and it's like a crazy jackhammers that just getting closer and closer to you. We already saw all the rocks coming our way, and it's so scary. It's like feels like the seconds before death.
והם עם הגוף שלהם, המחבלים, החוליה הזאת, עם הגוף שלהם עלינו, על המזרונים.
And they are with their bodies, the terrorists, that cell that watch us, they're with their bodies on us, covering us, on the mattresses, protecting us from attacks of our own military.
The complicated relationship they had with their captors. That's subject of part 3, the guards. In general, the only Hamas members who talk to the media are official spokespeople and leaders. And one of the things about these hostage interviews is that they give a glimpse of lower-level operatives. Some Hamas, some with other militant groups operating in Gaza who are keeping Israelis hostage. Here's Lee Naim, the interviewer.
בסוף זה האנשים שמחזיקים אתכם בחיי. At the end of the day, these are the people holding you and your life depends on them. So with all the hates, I assume it was a very uncomfortable situation. I imagine myself. I want them to like me so I can survive. So how did you manage it? ניהלתם את זה.
כן. אתה מבין שחיינו בידיהם?
Yeah, we realized our lives are in their hands. We realized they were just a cog in the system, that they're not the people making the decisions. Sometimes we would ask them, if someone gave you the decision to hurt us, would you do that? And they would say, no, we are going to die before that happens. Worst case, we're all going to die together. And that was pretty encouraging to hear.
Han says that eventually there were 4 men guarding her family who told them they were 28, 30, 37, and 44 years old. 3 married, 2 with kids. The youngest had a failed engagement. The oldest was the most religious, Han said. He would read the most. One of them was learning Hebrew. I would ask Agam if she could help him study, years or dates.
מה הדבר שהכי הפתיע אותך לגלות עליהם? What was the most surprising thing that you discovered about them?
לפעמים את הרגישות שלהם.
Their sensitivity at times, how much they miss their wives. At some point, one of them wrote a letter to his wife, and it was like contagious, because then another one wrote a letter to his wife.
I'm just going to interrupt here because I just want to point out the intimacy of this. These people locked together in a dark, hot, stuffy apartment, planes dropping bombs around them, who cannot help but notice what the others are doing in this cramped space. It's so personal. But at the same time, they are not on the same team. There's a distance. So when Chen and Agam see them all writing letters to their wives,
and
it made us really nervous, Agam and I. We were like, why do you need to write letters to your wives right now? Is something going on? Is there something about to happen? One of them said he had an agreement with his wife to put the letter in his pocket, so if they found his body, they find it in the pocket. We saw their pain sometimes. We could see their pain. We saw them breaking down and cry.
What did they cry over?
About the uncertainty of what's going on with their family, whether their family was hurt or no. That was the main thing.
הם הסתכלו עליכם כבני אדם? Did they see you as human beings?
כן, נראה שכן, כן.
Yeah, it seems so, yeah, yes. I mean, I felt like they really liked Galantal, despite all the harm that was done. And there was harm done.
מעבר להיותם פעילי חמאס, היה שניים שהם הציגו את עצמם.
Beyond their activity in Hamas, they also had a business of perfumes. And they really showed us, they brought a box with all the perfumes. They wanted Agam and I to check it out, to try it, and tell them what we thought, what we liked. They really showed us the syringes, how they make it with the percentages of the alcohol, how they put it all together. We also started having conversations about the roots and the depth of the conflict. From their perspective, we were the first ones who murdered. We were the ones who deported and murdered their parents in
1948, the year Israel became a state. The violence in that period resulted in the deaths of 15,000 Palestinians and the displacement of over 750,000 others.
When the conversation reached those points, that's when we would stop because it would just get too tense. Because we didn't agree with them, but on the other hand, we also didn't know all the facts to argue with them. So we didn't want to upset them too much. We wanted to be okay with them.
Sometimes, though, Chen couldn't help herself. Like she says, every time they were moved from one apartment to another, passed from one group of captors to the next, the new ones would always ask, "Is this the family?"
ואז אני צריכה להסביר להם, כן, רצחתם את הבעל שלי, רצחתם את הבעל
And then I
שלי.
needed to explain to them that, yes, you murdered my husband, you murdered my daughter, so this is the family. And then sometimes after that, there would be like a silence.
שאם ים ונדב נרצחו
And
לשווא,
sometimes they would say that if the person who murdered Yam and Nadav did it in vain, like if Yam and Nadav weren't a real threat, that person, on the day of his death, he will be judged. If he killed them in vain, he'll go to hell. If not, he'll go to paradise.
אם לא, הוא ילך לפרדייז.
Sometimes there was this moment of silence, or they would apologize when they realized that their own people, their brothers, killed Nadav and Yam.
שהם, אחים שלהם, brothers, רצחו את נדב, את ים.
Generally, though, her captors were pretty unrepentant and open about their hopes for the future.
They also told us, we like you, you're a good family, don't go back to Kfar Aza. We'll come back there again. How many were we last time? Like 3,000? How many people you think we have in our organizations? They asked me and Agam.
התחלנו לזרוק מספרים, ואז הגענו ל-20,000, 40,000.
Agam and I would try 20,000, 40,000. So we'll come, they say, in 3 years. In 3 years we'll rebuild, and then 40,000 will come again.
7 שבועות שהיינו שם,
They were in euphoria. In the 7 weeks that we were there in Gaza, our impression was that they were elated over their success on October 7th and that they plan to come again. We never got the impression that their spirits are being hurt because of the attacks.
Part 4. News from home. There was a radio in the apartment. And sometimes the guards would let Chen and her family listen, but it was an ordeal to get them to agree to that. When the news came on, they would beg to be allowed to listen to 10 minutes worth.
מהדורה שלא דיברו על החטופים, שברה את ליבנו עמוקות, היינו מחכים לזה.
And newscasts where they didn't talk about the hostages really broke our hearts. We just couldn't accept that they are talking about deepening the fighting, and they don't talk about us. And when we came back, we actually talked about it, and we noticed that ever since they are making an effort to always at the top of the hour to mention the hostages. Because we really waited for it every time.
Listening to the radio, they started to piece together how big the attacks of October 7th had been. They had no idea of the scope. Other hostages said this too. One told the interviewer that she was shocked to hear that 75 people from her kibbutz, a fifth of the kibbutz, had been taken hostage. She thought it was just her and the 3 other people who she'd met in captivity. Chaim was listening to a broadcast when her own father came on the air, talking about them.
ואומרת, אנחנו מצטערים על ים ונדב. זה היה כאילו ככה...
And the radio host is saying goodbye and saying, we're sorry for Nadav and Yam. That's when I finally realized that they're not with us anymore.
Up until then, she'd held out hope that maybe the army had come right afterwards and saved Nadav.
זה פעם ראשונה שגל, בן 12, עכשיו הוא בן 12.
That was the first time that Gal, who's 12, now is 12, cried. We were really moved to hear my dad on one hand, and on the other hand, very, very sad. And still we kept asking for the radio.
One day on the radio, they heard about the dramatic rescue of a hostage named Uri Megidish by the Israeli military. That news really seemed to get to their guards. The guards started acting very differently.
They started going crazy. They wore their bulletproof vests and they put their uniforms, like they became more like soldiers. Their stress immediately affected us, was projected on us. I remember at some point they were also taking out some sort of grenade in case someone is going to break the door. And they told us if they're going to break the door, we're all going to hide in the bathroom together. It was just awful stress.
בידיעה על אורי עודדה שמחה באיזושהי צורה? And the news about Ori, did it encourage you or stress you in any way?
הלחיצה גם...
I mean, we were jealous of her. We were jealous that they were able to get to her and rescue her, but we saw what it did to our guards. That's why after they rescued the last 3 hostages 2 months ago, I immediately thought, I mean, it's a happy thing. Each one is a universe, it's a life. But I immediately thought, what does it mean for the people still there? Are they being guarded more intensely? Are they being transferred from one place to another now? I was scared. Maybe they're hurting them more. Maybe they're doing something to them now.
ופחדתי עליהם, לא יודעת, פוגעים בהם אולי בגלל זה יותר, או עושים להם משהו...
Chen Amal Goldstein, being interviewed by Lee Naim. The story continues, and we hear from other hostages, including one who met the head of Hamas in a tunnel. That's in a minute on Chicago Public Radio when our program continues. This is American Life. I'm Ira Glass. Today's show, 51 days, a year after the Hamas attack on Israel that started the current war. We're hearing the story of Chen Amal Goldstein, who was held hostage with 3 of her kids for 51 days. And before we get back to her story, I wanted to play you a few clips from some of the other interviews that Lee Naim did with hostages for the Israeli news podcast Echad Bayom, One a Day. One of the interviews she did gave a glimpse of life in a tunnel that's very different from Chen's experience. This is somebody who spent her entire time in captivity in the tunnels, a 78-year-old named Margalit Moses. And to give you a sense of her personality, her captors at some point started calling her the captain. Because in that particular group of hostages, she would be the one to suggest things to the guards like, don't cook the potatoes in the morning and then serve them to us hours later. Cook them shortly before we eat them and bring them warm. Put them on a plate with a bit of salt. People like salt on their potatoes. Margalit says when she arrived in Gaza, they walked deep into the tunnels, an hour and a half or 2 hours, before they arrived at the rooms underground where she and about 15 people from her kibbutz were held. There were mattresses on the floor and chairs.
Oh, היה לנו חדר מהודר, ממש.
Oh, we had an elegant room, really. We had a room that was covered with ceramics, both the floors and the walls.
גם מעוגלת וגם לבנה מסיד.
Except for the ceiling that was both curved and painted white with lime. The walls were decorated with a beautiful, delicate design. And high up above, there were drawings of tulips with beautiful green leaves.
עד כמה זה... How organized and prepared did the tunnels there seem?
המנהרות מאוד מאוד מאורגנות.
Oh, the tunnels were very, very organized. I walked around, even at night. I didn't have that much to do, unless somebody wanted to go to the bathroom and I helped them.
Margalit was up all night because she's somebody who needs a CPAP machine to sleep. She brought one with her, but her captors took it. And then she asked a doctor for another one. She said he smiled and laughed and said, "We don't have those here." So, she says, she didn't sleep for more than 5 or 10 minutes at a time for nearly 2 months. So at night, up anyway, she would walk people to the toilet.
So I was walking around at night in the tunnels, and generally we were only allowed to get to a certain point, beyond which they said you can't go. And I constantly was wondering, what is there that they don't let us go there? Do they have some weapons there? Or I don't know what.
אז אני, לילה אחד שראיתי שגם הם ישנים כולם.
So one night when I saw that they were all asleep, even that person that was supposed to be awake to supposedly watch over us, so I said, I really have to go see what's there.
ואז אני שם באה ואני רואה ששם...
And then I arrive and I see that there was a splitting of a few tunnels. So I peeked to see into each one what's there.
והנה מנהרה אחת מלאה, אבל מה זה מלאה?
And here there's this one tunnel full to the brim with lots of six-pack of mineral water. So straight away, one bottle here, one bottle there.
Slacked. You hid them.
אז ככה היה לנו מים.
Yes. And that's how we had mineral water, at least for a few days.
She said one tunnel she looked down had mattresses. Others had electrical wires and water pipes. Near the room in the tunnel, there was a kitchenette with shelves for canned food. And there was a group of hostages that were in a room that was mostly open, but had some cages, she said, like for prisoners, on the side.
אז זה היה מאוד מאורגן.
So it was really organized from their point of view, the tunnels. Numbers, each floor a different color. They sometimes had to walk around with notes that explained to them where to turn, because the place is huge.
מפות? Maps?
מפות, כן.
Maps, yes, maps. We reached -5 sometimes.
-5, 5 floors down.
When they were afraid there might be soldiers outside, they called us to come quickly. So we went downstairs quickly, and then we saw -5. So just imagine kilometers and kilometers and 5 floors.
Incredibly, one day, the second day of their captivity, Margalit says they had a visit from the man responsible for their kidnapping and the deaths of their loved ones, the head of Hamas himself, Yahya Sinwar. Like I say, I find this to be a completely believable story because nothing dramatic happens in this story at all. Like if you made up a story like this, the head of Hamas would say something fascinating and revealing, or she would get off some great line. None of that happens. It just seems like he ordered people to bring back hostages. They did. It's the next day, and he wants to see some of them for himself. Here's Margalit's account.
He entered the room with his entourage. He asked us, "Do you know who I am?" So I said to him, "Yes, you're Yahya Sinwar." So he opened his eyes big. He was surprised I knew his name. And he said, "Yes, it's true, I'm Yahya Sinwar." He speaks fluent Hebrew very well. And he said not to be afraid, and they will give us anything we need, and that we're only there to be bargaining chips for prisoner exchange.
איך זה לשמוע את זה ממנו? How did it feel to hear that from him?
Horrifying. The audacity with which he said it, with his nose up in the air. For me, it was an unpleasant moment. This arrogance of his, it humiliates you. And most of us were older people. What is the point of kidnapping older people and putting them there?
מה יש לחטוף מבוגרים ולשים אותם שם?
So that's Margalit Moses, who was released around the same time as Chen and her family. I want to play you some stuff from one other interview before we get back to Chen. Ada Sagi is 75 years old and from the same kibbutz as Margalit. Her life in captivity was very different from Margalit's or Chen's for a few reasons, and one of them is that she speaks Arabic, taught it in middle schools, partly out of an idealistic belief in coexistence and wanting to speak with her neighbors. And so she understood what was being said around her when she was in captivity, understood where she was October 7th, when she was driven south to the city of Khan Yunis.
וככה הגענו למחסן מיון של ירקות בפאתי ח'אן יונס מזרח.
We arrived at the vegetable sorting warehouse at the eastern outskirts of Khan Yunis. They unloaded us, took from us some jewelry I had from my mother, wedding band, my glasses.
ואני התחננתי שישאיר לי את המשקפיים כי אני מאבדת אוריינטציה באופן מוחלט.
And I begged them to leave the glasses because without them I completely lose orientation. They took it because they claimed that it has a tracking chip in it. And they are petrified by chips.
Did you try to explain that?
Yes, I tried to explain to them, what do I have in common with a chip? Well, they said you used to be a soldier.
I should say they said that to a 75-year-old woman because there is mandatory military service in Israel. So she served.
But when I was a soldier, there was no computer and there were no chips. They explained that every soldier has a chip, and I said, I wish it was true. If it was true, we would know where everybody is. In that warehouse, somebody stood and did the check-in. He was an English-speaking person. He asked for first name, last name, ID number from where we are. And he also was asking for the phone number of the children. Naturally, I invented phone numbers. I said, it's like check-in into a hotel.
Another fact about Ada. She left her home without putting on shoes. Her captors told her, don't put them on. And so she spent her entire captivity barefoot. Though she was given a pair of socks in November when it got colder. Ada was held captive with another woman from her kibbutz, Meirav Tal, who's in her 50s, 20 years younger than Ada. Not somebody she knew well before this. But the fact that there was somebody else to share this with really defined her time as a hostage. It made it easier.
They put us in the children's bedroom. There were 2 bunk beds. They gave us the lower beds. I had the drawing of Angry Birds, and Merav had the drawing of Sweet Dreams.
How did you pass the time, you and Merav?
Hours and hours of logic games, and we were playing a crossword puzzle in our heads. We were talking about our family, every child, grandchild. We got to know each other, family as if the 2 of us were sisters.
שיתפתם גם בחששות? Did you also share your worries?
Yes, we were very, very much partners in our worries.
They also talked to their guards. One guard spoke some English, and Ada, of course, spoke Arabic. One of the guards in particular, she says, was very loyal to her and Merav. He listened to Al Jazeera and tell them what was happening in the news.
He said all the time that I'm treating you as if you were my mother. I felt that there is some respect. We know that his wife is a midwife at the Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis. He has 4 kids. He evacuated her and the kids from the home to her parents' home.
מה סיפר לך? Oh, he really told you about himself.
Yes, he told us a lot. One time while he was telling that, he said, I'm not involved. And I said, what do you mean not involved? And he said, I'm neither jihad nor Hamas, but I want money. I asked him, but myself and Merav are at your place in the kids' room. You took away our freedom, our basic right, and you say that you are not involved? And he said, I want money. I want money for myself and my wife to get visa for us and the kids and fly away from here because there is no future here.
Okay, back to Chen and her family. We're at part 5, moving around. One of the things you realize listening to Chen is just how much of the experience of being a hostage can be just being moved from place to place. No idea where you are or where you're going or why. Chen's daughter Agam worried every time they were moved that this was the time they were going to be taken somewhere to be killed. When they walked through the streets, they were supposed to keep their eyes down and blend in. The captors gave them fake names to use if anybody tried to talk to them, and they would practice the pronunciation of the names with them to be sure they got them right. That night, they thought they might die in that supermarket. Chen and her kids were moved to an apartment above the supermarket till that building started shaking. It didn't seem safe, and they moved to a mosque for shelter. And then they headed out on what Chen remembers as a long journey through the streets of Gaza, part of it on a donkey cart.
8 על חמור, על עגלה כזאת עם חמור.
8 of us on a donkey, like on a cart attached to a donkey, and the donkey is stumbling.
And bombing all around?
Bombings, yeah, and roads that would end, and they would have to ask the locals whether we can pass through or not, and then the donkey would need to make a U-turn.
Finally, they reached an apartment, which he says was still under construction. Maybe a month and a half into their captivity, not long before the end, one of the guards takes Chen and her kids out of the apartment and onto the street.
הליכה מאוד ממושכת, ברחובות עזה מגיעים לבית ספר.
Very long walk in the streets of Gaza. We're outside, and for the first time we see the sound down. And then we get to a school.
All around the school are Palestinian civilians who are seeking shelter. And Chen and her kids, in their disguises, apparently look like just another displaced Palestinian family needing help.
People were putting all these sheets and putting together these impromptu tents, and there's a lot of people there, and they approached the guy from the cell and they offer to house us, to host us. He kept saying that people are offering help because they see family with kids, so they offer to help.
אנחנו פעם ראשונה אחרי 6 שבועות יושבים בחוץ.
For the first time after 6 weeks, we're sitting outside and we're seeing the moon. And Tali's telling me, "Hey, Mom, look, this is the moon." And there was excitement in the air too, because there was a feeling of like a ceasefire might be coming.
האמנת לזה? Did you believe it?
היה נראה שכן.
Yeah, it looked like yes, I wished for it. And then I look at the sky and I show Tal and I tell him, look which stars are moving and which stars are staying still, because the skies were packed with planes. And then all of a sudden people near the school launched rockets, and they were so thrilled with every rocket they launched. And I was immediately scared, like maybe now the planes are going to bomb the school.
Then she says the guard who was with them, who'd been with them for weeks, said goodbye to Chen, wished them a quick return to Israel, told her to take good care of Agam, and handed her off to the next group of captors. They were told there's no safe place above ground anymore, and got taken down into a tunnel, where they met 6 other hostages, 2 kids, 4 women, 2 of whom are young Israeli soldiers.
They had just finished basic training and a course, and they didn't even start doing their job. Kids, they're like 18 and a half, 19-year-olds. Some of them were alone until they got to that tunnel, and some were physically injured, alone, yeah. Some of them went through a lot. There was something really powerful about that week in that tunnel. Even though, with all the difficulties and even though they seemed to be on edge, we were really there for one another. There was some sort of feminine energy strength in that tunnel.
The 2 kids, Ella and Dafna, were sisters, 8 and 15. Their dad and his partner were killed on October 7th, and the other women had been taking care of them in Gaza.
And they were amazing. They showed so much emotional strength, also towards the children, Dafna and Ella, and that's something I couldn't handle.
To be there for other kids.
Yes, I couldn't, but the young women, they were there for them. They were with them even before we arrived, so they were the authority for those girls. And I was in awe, truly, at how they managed to handle them and be there for them, with their physical injuries and with their emotional injuries, and still try to function, to cook whenever possible, to be there for each other. I remember one day one of them had this like panic attack, and she started hyperventilating and she started going up the stairs. And she sat there on the stairs and she was crying her heart out, and she was crying, and she just like, it's like she couldn't breathe. And she wanted a moment to herself, because all this togetherness can be really intense too. And of course we're there for one another. We're helping each other, but it can just be suffocating too, and you end up craving your privacy and just a moment for yourself and some air and some space.
This is where Chaim and her kids spent the week before they're finally released. They were told during that week, it's going to be soon.
They kept saying Friday, oh no, it's going to be Saturday, oh no, now it's going to be Sunday. I remember thinking to myself, it's not a big deal, like the absurdity of it. It's not a big deal if I stay here one more day. Getting out, I realized I'm going to have to face something very difficult, that I lost Yam and Nadav.
Yam and Nadav, her daughter and husband, of course.
And the day of our release came. It was a very nerve-wracking day. Saying goodbye to the girls was difficult. They were like, who's going to be released next? Is it going to be the civilians first, the soldiers? I mean, the soldiers kind of understood that it will take a little longer. I mean, they didn't realize it's going to be that long, but they would never imagine they would still be there.
אבל היו איתכם גם 2 אזרחיות נוספות. But there were 2 other women with you, civilians.
Yes, they're wounded, but they're still there. Yes, they're still there. It was a difficult farewell, also deciding what to say to their parents, what not to say to their parents. They asked us to fight for them. They asked us not to forget them, to go to protest, that we speak to their parents. That we did immediately. They also told us what to say and what not to say, but everything was with the assumption that they would be released right after us. That still hasn't happened. They're still there.
Chen and her family were released as part of a deal negotiated by Qatar, Egypt, and the United States, where 80 Israelis, mostly women and children, lots of older people, were swapped for 240 Palestinians, mostly women and children, held in Israeli prisons. Chen's transfer was broadcast on Israeli TV, and the first stages of it look pretty chaotic, actually. There's a random mass of people crowded on some sidewalk. Cars with hostages pull up, one after another. Each hostage is ushered down this sidewalk past all this confusion to another waiting car. It was frightening, Chen says.
We walk a while from the Hamas vehicles to the Red Cross vehicles, and we're being filmed, it's all staged, and it's like their moment of glory. They're wearing their best uniforms. We never saw these uniforms before. And I remember asking myself, how did Israel allow this? How could Israel allow our transfer to happen in such a public, exposed place when tons of people were there? Like, we were scared. We were so scared until the end. We already survived this. We're already about to get released, and we're still like, they had to make it scary for us all the way to the end.
Then the Red Cross vehicles take off in a convoy and drive all the way to the border.
And then all of a sudden, like magic, we are being moved to our military. And it was very, very moving. That moment was the saddest happiness of my life. I knew Nadav wouldn't be there to hug me. I just wanted someone to be there and hug me and tell me, that's it, you're safe now after everything we've gone through.
Ada, the hostage who'd been an Arabic teacher, also talked in her interview about that moment right at the end of captivity, when she finally made it out and reached the Israeli military forces. It got to her in a very different way.
There was a group of officers there. There was a white shining tent with everything you could wish for. I walked in and they took me in and I screamed, where were you on the 7th of October? Not that they deserved it because it was not them, but where the hell was the army on the 7th of October? And I started crying, and they caught me the moment I was falling down, and I'm not one of those fainters. It was a very difficult moment.
Chen and her family were filmed on the helicopter that brought them home, talking to the crew, getting a tour of the cockpit. Chen says it was hard, getting this very respectful treatment, not to think about how this was the same military that she and her kids had been so scared of in Gaza for so long during the airstrikes. These rescuers were in the same army that might have killed them.
Did you say anything about it?
I started talking about when I first came back because when I was in Gaza, I promised myself that I would talk about it, that I would talk about that complexity. But then you come back and they tell you, don't talk about it as much with the media, not with the international media, of course, because it's not a good look. And you see here how hard it is. Like, you see people who did a bunch of operations in the military and got to very senior positions, and they're not able, it's like they're unable to come and just say, we're sorry. We're sorry for what you went through on the 7th when you were inside your shelter. We're sorry that we bombed in Gaza when you were there with your kids.
Marguerite Moses, the woman you heard earlier who was held in the tunnels the entire time, was released 2 days before Chen. She got invited this summer by Prime Minister Netanyahu to meet with him and some other released hostages. She wrote this letter as her reply.
Mar Netanyahu, shalom rav.
Hello, Mr. Netanyahu.
Toda ala hazmana.
Thank you for the invitation, but I will not participate in a meeting for the sake of photos and public relations while my friends are rotting in Hamas tunnels in Gaza. With my own eyes, I saw them alive in captivity, and now, due to their second abandonment since October 7th, we are receiving them in coffins. In light of reports that you have thwarted yet another deal to release the captives. I see no reason to attend a meeting with somebody who has demonstrated through his actions that the release of the captives is not a priority and who is abandoning them to their death. I would be happy to meet you at the welcoming event for the 109 captives upon their return to their families. Thank you.
Margalit Moses.
The program was produced today by Dana Chivas, Diane Wu, Yael Evan-Or, and me, with editing help from Nancy Updike. Based on interviews from the Israeli podcast Echad B'Yom, a production of N12. The staff of Echad B'Yom who produce these interviews are Li Naim, Shira Erel, Rom Atik, Yair Bashan, and Guy Imbar. Our Hebrew interpreters were Yael Evan-Or, Amira Jolson, and Miriam Kaplan. The people who put together our show today include Bim Adewunmi, Sean Cole, Michael Kamate, Aviva de Kornfeld, Emmanuel Jochi, Hani Hawasli, Hannah Jaffe Walt, Valerie Kipnis, Henry Larson, Seth Lynn, Catherine Raimondo, Stone Nelson, Ryan Rummery, Alyssa Shipp, Ike Shrees Kandaraja, Horace Starcheski, Lily Sullivan, Christopher Sotala, Marisa Robertson Texter, Matt Tierney, and Nancy Updike. Our managing editor is Sarah Abdurrahman. Our senior editor is David Kestenbaum. Our executive editor is Emmanuel Berry. Special thanks today to Noah Yachot, Daria Shuali, Edgar Kellett, and Sam Klein. Also thanks today to the rest of the Echad B'Yom staff, Elad Simchayoff, Adi Chetzloni, Daniel Shachar, and Danny Nudelman. Our website, thisamericanlife.org. You can stream our archive of over 800 episodes for absolutely free. This American Life is delivered to public radio stations by PRX, the Public Radio Exchange. I'm Ira Glass, back next week with more stories of This American Life.
This message comes from Wise, the app for doing things in other currencies. Send, spend, or receive money internationally and always get the real-time mid-market exchange rate with no hidden fees. Download the Wise app today or visit wise.com. T's and C's apply.